5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
One of the largest pro wrestling events in the country, WrestleCade, returns to Winston-Salem, November 24th to the 26th. Meet your favorite wrestling stars, experience live wrestling events, shop for exclusive wrestling merch, and more. 3 days of family-friendly fun for fans of all eras during WrestleCade, November 24th to the 26th. Your chance to meet the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson. It all goes down at the Benton Convention Center in Winston-Salem. Get your tickets now, WrestleCade.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, from the studios in the wrestling capital of the South, it's another terrific episode of The BENGEBUSTER Show. Please welcome your host, Tony Binge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another great edition of The BENGEBUSTER Show. And I have been waiting with excitement to do this week's show. As we're getting closer to WrestleCade, as you heard at the top of the program, WrestleCade is just right around the corner, and lots of chances to meet your heroes, the people you love, the people you love to hate. But this year, a special attraction. I know a lot of people would love to get their hands on a actual Ric Flair robe. Well, you can't really put your hands on it, but you can definitely take a photo with it, as my guest this week is none other than the owner of the original Ric Flair Starrcade 83 robe. Let's bring to the show right now, Mr. Wes Potter. Wes, how are you?
Man, I'm doing good. I'm doing great, man. Looking forward to WrestleCade and just hanging out here in the beautiful, great state of North Carolina.
Man, I tell you, that's the great thing about North Carolina is it doesn't matter what time of year it is, you get all the seasons. Because the last few weeks it's been summer, then we went straight from summer right to fall, back to summer. So now we're starting to get back into the fall weather. I know there in Greenville where you live, you're a little bit closer to the coast than I am, but I'm sure the weather there is just as beautiful as it is here.
Yeah, man. It's I always say we're the greatest state in the union in North Carolina, and you give us a week, and we'll go through summer, fall, winter, spring, all in 1 week. Just like you said. So if you don't like the weather, just hang around for a few hours, and it's bound to change. Yeah. So you get the full experience here in the Tar Heel State.
that is definitely true. Speaking of North Carolina, are you originally from North Carolina? Like have you been here your whole life?
Man, born and bred, brother.
Yeah, same here. I was born in right outside of Charlotte, and then I grew up in the Greensboro High Point area. And then met my wife and moved back to the Charlotte area, and now this is where I live. I got me a house here now, so I'm probably not going to be going anywhere, at least for the next 30 years. So, but I'm here for a while, so I like it here, and I wish that I would have moved here a lot sooner, like back in the 80s. Because I live in a little town called Mooresville, which is right outside of Charlotte. And as you know, and a lot of the wrestling fans that listen to this program probably knows, in the early 80s, Nelson Royal, of course, his Western store is still here. As a matter of fact, it's like 2 miles from my house. But right in behind his store used to be a barn, and from what I understand, he used to train a lot of guys, and he and the Andersons would get in there and stretch a few guys, and make them wonder if they really, really wanted to be in the sport of pro wrestling.
Yeah, it's when you talk about North Carolina, obviously we've got a rich history, pretty much in gosh, man, I mean, probably all the major sports to a degree, right? And you talk about kind of moving, here and everything that we get to experience, kind of like you said, I'm over here towards the coast. I always say, I'm like, what more are you looking for? You can go to the east and you got the coast. You can go to the west and you got the mountains. If you don't like either one of those, land somewhere in the middle, get towards Greensboro, Charlotte, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you're kind of landlocked there and you're good. So we've got everything there is to offer. But I've been to Nelson Royal's store there in Mooresville, and it's obviously a neat little place, just from a kind of a Western, merchant perspective. But man, when you talk about Mooresville, being from North Carolina, before we had long before we had the Panthers and before we had the Hornets or the Bobcats, we pretty much had two things, which was, wrestling and stock car racing. And, Mooresville's kind of the hub, obviously, as if you're living there for stock car racing. A lot of the race teams are kind of anchored in that area. So, I'm proud of the heritage that we have from the sports perspective of the wrestling and the racing. And, of course, we've always got the Duke UNC rivalry and all those great things that are kind of going on there. So, if it's North Carolina, if it's pro North Carolina, I'm all for it.
Yeah. I remember as a young boy, long before Cablevision was a big thing. Here in the Charlotte area, you had two things. Like you said, you had Jim Crockett's Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, and then you had stock car NASCAR racing. And that was pretty much the two biggest draws in this area. And the cool thing, incidentally, the same fans that was going to NASCAR races were the same fans that was going to Jim Crockett's Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. So it was a big deal, back in those days, back in the 80s and stuff. And even still to this day, I mean, I've been living in Mooresville now for about 12 years. And when the races in Charlotte, it's still, our streets get really busy and we get a lot of traffic from all the fans driving in, and they want to, come to the race shops and hopes to get a glimpse of one of the drivers. And I know when the race is in town, it's not, it's definitely not odd to look up in the sky and see a helicopter flying from the race shops back down to the racetrack. I see that all the time. And when I first moved here, I would ask my wife, I'm like, why's all these helicopters up here? And she's like, oh, that's all the race car drivers, flying from the race shop back to the airport, or I'm sorry, back to the racetrack in Charlotte. That way they're not stuck in the traffic. I'm like, wow, that's pretty amazing. So it's a big thing. But speaking of a big thing, our show tonight, we're going to be talking about the original Starrcade 83 Robe. We're going to be learning a whole lot of stuff about this Robe. I know I'm going to be learning things I probably didn't know, and hopefully our listeners will too. But getting to, or speaking about Starrcade, when I was a kid, the only Starrcade I got to go to was 1986, and that was probably one of the most popular ones, here in the Carolinas at the time. But 83 was really big because I'm sure a lot of people have heard there was a snowstorm that night, and they didn't think that they were going to even be able to do the show. But lo and behold, it did, and the show happened, and from that point on, Starrcade become like the mainstay. Everybody looked forward to it here in the Carolinas, from 83 all the way to 86, and after 86 it kind of moved away. But 83 was the one that we're talking about tonight, and that was kind of like the first time. Well, it wasn't really the first time that we saw the Robe, but that show is kind of what made that Robe popular, right?
Yeah, I think when wrestling fans, or at least some of the fans I've kind of interacted with over the years, if you kind of pull back in your memory a little bit, it typically goes back to Starrcade 83. If we talk about Jim Crockett Promotions, or you're talking about Ric Flair, or you're talking about memories from the 80s for anybody that was a wrestling fan, or certainly anybody that was a wrestling fan in North Carolina. It kind of goes back to that one event as being sort of the standout memory. If it's people that were there that I talked to and they remember the snowstorm, or they remember, of course, the match with Harley at Starrcade 83, or the fact that, that was kind of where Ric Flair sort of started to cement his legacy, and in those visual images you kind of get in your mind. It all goes back to kind of that moment and that match. But kind of like you alluded to earlier, the Robe was actually '83 with that Robe. I think the one thing that kind of stands out is always, Starrcade 83 is where everybody kind of goes back to.
Yeah. Now, speaking of the Robe, do you know what year the Robe was actually made?
That's a great question, and I don't with certainty. But what I can say is over the last few years, my original thought for probably the better part of a decade, from say 2000 to 2010, probably that 10-year span, I was always of the mindset that the Robe originated somewhere around 1980, 81, but probably in the last 5 to 8 years after that, I actually saw a picture that was dated from 78 of him, of Ric Flair wearing the Starrcade Robe. So wow. It at least goes back to 78, which I'm pretty sure is probably had to be when it was made. I just don't imagine that it sort of predated that time period.
Right.
And it was so elegant and so sort of boisterous, for lack of a better word. I don't know that he actually wore it much from 78 until probably about 81, because it was so flashy that I think he honestly probably tried to save it for what he probably hoped would be, his first title run, which came, you'll have to fact check me here, but I think it was September of 81.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So even though he probably had it in 78, I don't think he wore it that much. He's probably saving it, so to speak, until 81, when he first took the title off of Dusty for a short period, and he did wear it for that match in 81 against Dusty, and gosh, I think that was in Kansas City, if I remember.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So it goes back to at least 78. So unless I'm wrong with what still is kind of out in the marketplace today, that's probably one of the oldest robes that still, it's definitely a significant robe that's in existence today, but probably one of the oldest as well, if not the oldest.
Yeah, yeah, and I know. I mean, it's up there in my definitely my top 3 favorite Flair robes of all time. But I mean, it's such a significant part of his history, because basically, when Starrcade 83 came around, or prior to 83, and whenever they would announce Ric Flair, they would say he was from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and it wasn't until probably 83 is Starrcade 83 is kind of when he started saying Charlotte was his new home. So I know a lot of people, at least I thought this until you just said that, but I always thought that he had that robe made because it's Carolina blue, and it's kind of like his way of saying, hey, I'm a Carolina boy now. But now that you've told me that it was made maybe in 78, that takes it to a whole different level at that point.
Well, that's a good thought, and I don't know that your thought's necessarily wrong, because if we kind of turn the clock back, I think he had his first match in the Carolinas in 74. when he was tagging with Rip Hawk.
Yeah.
So again, I have to fact check me. So he had, he may not have been sort of a permanent residence here, and kind of going back and forth maybe from Gagne's territory to here, but he was beginning to sort of plant seeds here, so to speak. So even if the Robe was made in 78 and it didn't necessarily gain notoriety until 81 or later 83, I don't know that you're wrong with that thought process as far as the color scheme. When we think about that, there's been several either promos or interviews with Ric Flair over the years where he's mentioned the Tar Heels, or I've been at matches when he was still in WCW where he mentioned Duke basketball. And so if you think about sort of the branding and the colors there of the dark blue of Duke, the Carolina blue of the Tar Heels, and just to kind of throw it back to what we were talking about earlier with the stock car theme, if you think North Carolina and stock car racing, or just stock car racing in general, you probably think of Richard Petty. You think of the Petty blue, which if you see this Robe in person is very much a Petty blue. So it's almost a calling card to these brands and these colors that are very much North Carolina. So I don't know how intentional that was on his part. I think it was very intentional on the seamstress's part, Olivia Walker, to begin to transition this, what we call today in 2023, the brand of Ric Flair. In 1978 or 1980, she was probably way ahead of the curve in terms of creating this brand and these color patterns that represented, what he was going to do in terms of his place in the business, but also a calling card to transition his brand from maybe Minneapolis, Minnesota to Charlotte, North Carolina. So I don't know that you're far off with that thought. I mean, I think all of it plays a part in getting him from A to B, and, we'll claim him over here in North Carolina, even though, I think he was born in Memphis and then started the career, in the Minneapolis territory, but, we'll take claim for him over here in the Carolinas. So
yeah, for sure.
I don't think.
Now, excuse me. As far as the Robe itself, it like the cloth part of it is that like a is that like a velvet material, or is it more of a like what's the word I'm looking for? Like a nylon?
The composition of the whole thing is really, Olivia Walker was really an artist. I mean, and I say that, not just to sound cliche, but if you see her work, and I've had a chance to see not just some of her stuff for Ric Flair, but some of the other wrestlers that she made, for lack of a better word, costumes for.
Yeah,
man, those would hold against, things that were made for Elvis, things that were made for Liberace, anything Hollywood costume designers could come up with, she'd be able to not just hold a candle to them, but probably, tuck him in bed and kiss him on the forehead goodnight, as Ric Flair would say. She was that good. So if you look at the composition, I'm not quite sure. I guess it's probably almost a very sort of heavy duty knit, probably cotton, very thick, very heavy. Just the composition of the garment, that when you add the weight of all the sequins that are on the cape and the back, this thing's weighing 30, 40 pounds, just as a garment. But yeah. One of the really things that a lot of people either haven't seen, and I haven't really shared publicly, when Charlotte came here for the Treasure Show, I think one of the things that kind of caught her by surprise, she was really amazed at, is the attention to the detail that Olivia Walker would put into this thing, to where, not just the garment itself or the external visuals that we all saw as fans, but, underneath all this is a liner, right? If you're a man and you wear a sport coat, you've got a liner on the inside, but nobody ever sees that. It's on the inside of your sport. The liner that's on the inside of this robe is a peacock fabric. And I don't even know where you find something like that, but just the attention to detail. And I'll share this over on, we've got a new Facebook page out there. It's actually called Ric Flair Starrcade 83 Robe. And on that page, I'm sharing some pictures that have never been seen before, one of which will be that liner that's got those peacocks on it, and just her attention to detail with stuff like that. It's just out of this world. Not only the creativity, how she came up with it, but how she put it all together in such a wonderful, artistic presentation.
Yeah. Now on the cape part on the inside, like if you're looking at as Flair has his hands opened up, and the silver part inside is that like sheets of sequins, or is it individual sequins sewn together?
So it's individual sequins sewn together. It's
wow.
One by one, hand by hand. And that's one of the differences in her work versus other people's. You can take sort of the easy way out, which is, maybe you just buy a sheet of sequins that are already pre-applied and you sew it into a garment, and that can be done. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it could be done back then. But she chose to hand apply each one of these. Literally, if you picture a fishing line, right? The thin sort of dexterity of a fishing line, and then to hand apply a sequin to that, and then tie a knot after it so that it doesn't move, wow. And then apply another knot after that, and then to multiply that by 10 or 15,000. I don't even know how many sequins are on that cape. That's a tremendous amount of patience and detail, for which I have way too much OCD to deal with.
Yeah.
Let alone to apply in such a aesthetic fashion. And that's what separates her work from other works that came after, later in his career, when he had some things made by WWE or other, robe makers or gear makers. They didn't take that necessarily that same attention to detail. And that's not to discount their work, but we're a faster paced society now, so maybe you go for that route where you've got the whole sheet of sequins already ready, and you just sew it in and you cut it and you alter it to how you need it. But back then, man, everything was hand applied, and it's very obvious when you look at it up front. It's almost like you can feel each intentional movement that she put into every single bead, sequin, feather that was applied to that robe. It's unbelievable.
And looking at that robe, one of the things that catches my eye about it, if you look at all of Ric Flair's robes, they all fastened with a belt, but this one zips.
Yeah, so this one zips up front, and kind of to throw back to what we were talking about earlier with the color scheme and the sort of North Carolina references. I think there was also a very intentional move by Olivia Walker to capture sort of the presence that Ric Flair would eventually become known for. But if we look at 1980 or 82 or 83, maybe he was in the process of building that presence, but he wasn't quite known for that. And that was the entrance, the mystique, this sort of, I've walked in the room, everybody's going to stop and look at me kind of presence. Mm-hmm. That really the only other entertainer to that point, in not just in sports, but I say entertainer, from comedians to actors to entertainers, singers, wrestlers, the only person that really captured that was Elvis Presley. And so I think she probably channeled some of that spirit, because if we go back and probably look at Elvis's Aloha from Hawaii, and, again, you'll have to fact check me and look and see what year that was. But, it was some years before Starrcade 83, but Elvis had, had those jumpsuits crafted, and at one point the sort of eagle, what's called the eagle jumpsuit that had the cape in the back. And so I kind of like to think as more as I've kind of looked at the history and the evolution of her work, and then Ric Flair's brand and his entrance and things like that, that mystique, she really kind of captured a lot of that eagle jumpsuit and cape motif, and obviously altered it to fit Ric Flair, but it's very much kind of a beautiful marriage of, the mystique of Elvis and the building of the brand of Ric Flair that sort of manifested itself with this robe. So she did a good job of capturing, I feel like, that spirit of both of those entertainers.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely a beautiful robe. I mean, I'm sure it's beautiful when you look at it in the pictures, but I'm sure it's like most things, pictures doesn't do it justice.
It doesn't, and even today with the fact that it's, if it was crafted in 78, we're looking at, gosh, what, we're getting close to 45, 50 years here, right?
Right, yeah.
On this, obviously, it's an old article of clothing, first off, but to think about the matches that it's been in, the travel that it's experienced, it's been to Japan and back, and all over the Mid-Atlantic, all over pretty much the country. And so you look at the travel and the wear and tear and things like that, the fact that it's experienced so much exposure to the elements and it still survived, let alone in a condition where it's even somewhat presentable, is really not only amazing in itself, but then again, it's also a testament to her work. Right. That, all those applied sequins we talked about are still together and they've held up. I do remember right after I first got the robe, which would have been, 98, 99, I actually called Olivia Walker. I got her number and I called her on the phone because I was considering having that robe restored, because it does have some damage, and I only wanted her to touch it since she was the one that obviously created it. And I remember when I called her, she was actually heading out of the house for her birthday. It was her birthday when I had called her, and we planned to sort of reconnect to talk about getting the robe restored. But I remember in the brief conversation that I had with her, she mentioned that as we talked about the cape and the sequins, that he had taken it over to Japan, which I'm thinking was probably some of the matches he had with Kerry Von Erich. Right, yeah. And took it over there, and he had come out for his entrance to a match, and the robe he opened it up in the cape-like fashion, and it got snagged on a guardrail. And so part of those sequins just ripped right off of the, sort of the back of the robe, inside of the robe, but that back support piece had just ripped a whole line of sequins. And so it just kind of, flopped and fell over. And so he had to have it fixed for the next night because he only brought one robe with him. So in her words, she said to me, he took it to another seamstress and she botched it up. Those were her words. Wow. That botched it up. And so if you actually look at the composition of the symmetry of how those sequins are applied on the inside of the robe, you can actually see a jagged line that looks like it ripped and then it was reapplied. Maybe by somebody who didn't quite capture that same, feeling that she had, but they did the job in the moment and they got it done. So it's still there, right, when you look at it today. And so I never had that fixed. She passed away, unfortunately, after that initial conversation, and she never got a chance to repair the robe. But I think it's a really cool story that, he took it to Japan, it got ripped, somebody else messed it up in terms of the repair, but it's still there when you look at it today. So to me, that just kind of adds to the mystique of what the history of what this thing's been through and how it still survives today.
And it's still here. So any idea what the original price of the robe was when Flair had it made?
So that's that's a really good question. I'm not sure. I know that obviously, as he's given some prices and interviews over the years, I think at one point some of the prices for his robes obviously were getting close to the $5,000, the $8,000, the $10,000 range. So if we adjust that for inflation in today's dollars, you're talking about some serious money back then, but more serious money today. But my guess is probably, back then, I'm thinking probably around the $4,000 number. I don't know what that is adjusted for today's money, but when I did talk to her about the repairs, and she mentioned that about the other seamstress, botching up the job, she did mention that all of she only used the very best materials to make the robe with. And for the rhinestones, there were only Austrian crystals. They had to be, if you're familiar with the, I think it's Swarovski. I can't quite pronounce it, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. If you've been in the mall, there's the high end. It's pretty crystal.
Yeah, the difference in those, I think, is the fact that they're clear, but when the light hits them, it gives like a rainbow effect.
Absolutely.
Versus
and that's
just,
why
Yep.
She was very adamant on, it had to be that particular clear crystal. And, at that time when I talked to her, which would have been around, 1999, 2000, she had said that the rhinestones were, when she was making things for Dusty or Greg Valentine or Ric Flair, they were around $2 a pop on those rhinestones.
Right.
And so, some of those robes, depending on what robe it is, you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of those rhinestones.
Right.
So you could be talking a $2,000 just in the rhinestone costs, not even the application of them. And all these they're hand applied. They all have these grommets
and they're crimped,
come through the fabric.
Yeah.
And they're crimped into the fabric. So it's a very labor intensive process. So if you just think about that, I'm sure she, obviously Olivia Walker was married to Johnny Walker, who had some fantastic gear himself. And so I'm sure she probably, provided a lot of the guys with the friends and family discount, if you will,
right?
In terms of created, but probably undersold herself in terms of the value that she brought to a lot of these guys' brands. Dusty had great robes, Greg Valentine, Terry Taylor, Lex Luger, Ric Flair, all these guys, a lot of their imagery that we picture today is because of her. So she probably cut a lot of discounts with her husband being in the business and friends of the wrestlers, probably more than maybe what she should have. So if Flair paid $4,000 for it, it maybe should have been a $7,000 robe, even at that time.
Yeah.
Right. So just, incredible.
Yeah. I was listening to one of his podcasts and they had that, Ask Rick Anything. And one of the questions was, how much, did what was the average that he paid for the robes? And he said most robes that he had made, he paid $10,000 for, except for, and he said the most expensive robe that he ever had made was the one for his retirement match, and he paid $15,000 for that one. And of course now that one I believe is in the Smithsonian.
That's right.
But even if you look at that one, I know they were trying to make that one look similar to the Starrcade robe. But for me, I'm old school, but I didn't like the big flower in the center that was like, I guess, holding the cape on. And how it buckled all the way up to his neck, and it didn't have that V that most of his robes had. That was one of the things about that robe that I disliked the most. But it was a nice robe. But you can definitely look at that robe and look at an Olivia Walker robe, and you could definitely tell the difference.
And that's what I'm talking about when we talk about the sequins being applied in the cape, right? Inside of that robe, when he would hold his arms up, the material that they used for that was a much cheaper, more easily accessible, more efficient process to just apply to that robe. And it probably kept the cost at $15,000. Had they had the time or the ability to hand apply like she did all those sequins, if he says he spent 15 on that one, then to achieve that look, it probably would have been $35,000, because you're talking about the time to apply each one of those, nearly impossible for, I think at the time WWE probably had 2 or 3 seamstresses up there. So, I mean, it's almost an impossible task for them to service the whole roster at that level with that robe. But when you talk about the colors and the way that it fit and all that stuff, and it was great to see. I was there for that match, and you're right that it's in the Smithsonian, and they did great work for that robe. It wasn't quite as flattering to him at that point in time, right, for his age at that match, in the way that maybe it might should have been. Interesting story, during that period before they started crafting that robe, I was actually in discussions with them where he wanted to actually wear the Starrcade robe for that match. He wanted to wear it for that match. And so I was having an exchange with his wife at the time, which I think was wife number 3.
Yeah, Tiffany.
He's married to Tiffany at the time. And this was during the period where television had just gone to HD, and WWE was doing the whole WWE TV HD. And I told her, I said, I don't have a problem with him wearing it. I think that'd be really cool. It's a nice bookend to his career, assuming that it ended there, which in my mind it did. But
yeah, mine too.
If he wants to bookend it there with that robe, that's awesome. Great tribute. But to talk about the condition again, I said it's just not in the best condition. And so now that they've gone to HD and those cameras are going to be right there, I'm like, when part of this robe's falling apart, it's going to be visible. And you probably don't want that at WrestleMania 24. So they decided to go a different route, obviously, and have the robe made, which was, it served its purpose at the time. But again, kind of like you said, you can see the difference between that and original Olivia Walker.
Yeah. Her stuff is just so amazing, amazingly made. And if you go back and watch wrestling, 86, 87, 88, even WWF and NWA, immediately you can tell the ring jackets and the robes that she made versus some that, like for instance, their jackets were nice, but they wasn't Olivia Walker's. But I'm talking about the Von Erichs. The Von Erichs would come out in sequin jackets and half robes, and even Kerry had that in memory of David robe, which was really nice. But you could tell none of that stuff was Olivia Walker made.
That's right. Yeah, her she gave an interview. I think they lived down in Atlanta, and I want to say it was like 84 or 87, somewhere thereabouts. Might have been 87. I think she gave an interview with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and she kind of alluded to the fact, she said, I always would have liked to have made something for Liberace. And for as much as we've evolved in terms of entertainment and as a society, a lot of people may not even know who Liberace is now. But if you do go back and you look at his some of his Vegas performances, and there was a movie with Michael Douglas, and just his stage presence, right? And that's what we're talking about here. And that presentation, he had some pretty doggone, amazing outfits. Liberace up there, borderline Elvis level. And I like to think that, you know, if she had the opportunity to make something for him with sort of an unrestrained budget, she could have held her own with any of those folks that made stuff for Liberace. I mean, you would have had, you know, Elvis, Liberace, and Ric Flair. They all would have been in the same bucket. If she could have made something for him, she definitely would have done it justice.
Oh yeah, for sure. No doubt about that. Now, Ric Flair also said before that that he had contacted you about trying to buy that robe back. Is that true, or is he just telling some stuff online?
No, so I mean, there's definitely been an interest there. You know, as I kind of mentioned earlier, you know, there was talk at one point of him wearing the robe as far back as 2008, right, for the retirement match. So I think, you know, at this, you know, kind of my read on it has been from him and that side is that, you know, at this point, I think they, you know, he kind of realizes that, you know, that was kind of the, you know, the crowning achievement, so to speak, in his career. And that is sort of the piece that kind of represents that achievement, right? At least for him, because, you know, he's gone on record as saying, you know, he won the title in 81, but he didn't really consider it, you know, as like his sort of crowning moment until he beat Harley in Greensboro at Starrcade, and that was kind of the representation of what would become, you know, his career to follow. So I think now that as he's gotten older, he's kind of realized, you know, this is sort of the trophy, right, that represents kind of the greatest moment in my career. So yeah, there's definitely been interest from him on that.
That's awesome. So, speaking of interest, so you were on the WWE's Most Wanted Treasures. They gave you an offer of $60,000 for the boots and the robe, which we both know was a low ball offer. But either way, they made an offer. So since the show aired, have they got back in contact with you? Maybe made another offer or express any interest of still wanting the robe?
So, you know, I think the way sort of the conversation goes there is that I think there's always an understood interest in that, either just from a simple preservation standpoint, right? Like this is a pretty important piece, maybe not necessarily in the history of WWE, but, you know, obviously we know the way the NWA sort of unfolded into WCW, and then WCW sort of transitioned into the conglomerate of WWE. So I think for the most part, we, you know, for lack of a better word, we've kind of looked at WWE sort of as a caretaker, right? Of not just Atlantic, not just Ric Flair, but in terms of, you know, if they've purchased the library of world class, right? They kind of have to wear the white gloves, so to speak, to handle the legacy of the Von Erichs and to handle the legacy of the Mid-Atlantic or Mid-South with Bill Watts. And so they're kind of entrusted with these different territories that they may not have had an active involvement in at the time. But I think they recognize now more than ever that, you know, we're kind of the caretaker of, you know, the last 50, 60 years of the business. And in 2023, that's more important now than it was in 1995 or 2000, right? So
Right.
The fact that they even produced a show about some of these articles is a testament to their recognition that some of these things are pretty important. And so, you know, with them, we entered into an active loan agreement type situation to where, you know, obviously if there's a WrestleMania or a Royal Rumble and they say, hey, we're looking for this item and we know you've got it, can you loan that to us? for that period of time. So we've had those ongoing conversations. As far as offers, I think it's, again, always kind of understood that there's an interest there. I think it's more of a point of us kind of reaching an agreement to where we have to remember that WWE is, at the end of the day, they're a business operation, and it's got to make sense for them, whether that's signing, a talent that they're going to invest in and put on television and produce and try to generate revenue from, or if it's, a piece of memorabilia that we need to purchase for our archives. It's got to make business sense there. And so I think that sort of metric of making sense, that business sense, has increased in the last 5 years or so, to the point where, I know that they've got an interest in it. The conflict comes in of, sometimes the collector market, the fan base, sometimes has more vested emotional interest, as we talk about, the fans. You mentioned, you were at a Starrcade 86, right? And as I talked to some of these fans, they mentioned they were at Starrcade 83. And so that they were there, they experienced it, and that was their moment. They were in Greensboro. They lived in, a nearby town. And so there's more of an emotional attachment there for some of these fans that may be willing to pay more on a collector's market perspective than maybe what WWE is from a business perspective. But I think WWE realizes now that some of these things that maybe previously they didn't consider a viable investment, really are important pieces to the tune of what, the Baseball Hall of Fame, has acquired relics from private collectors, if it was a Babe Ruth jersey or a significant bat or baseball that maybe 20 years ago they wouldn't have considered purchasing, but they recognize the significance of it. And I think WWE's kind of more at that point now than they probably have been in the last 10 or 15 years. So there's always interest there, I think.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, and I'm sure they'll probably reach out again and in the future. But right now you're doing a new adventure, I guess. So you made the comment that you've loaned it to WWE and they've had it on display, but now you're doing something at WrestleCade this year where the fans can actually get their picture taken with the robe. Now, I know there's been speculation. People's talked about, oh, I can't wait to wear the robe. No, you're not wearing the robe, correct? You're standing beside the robe, taking your picture, which I think is totally amazing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So, it's one of those things where, if we talk about the Smithsonian and, relics and Cooperstown and baseball and preservation and things, there's always I think ultimately, I like to think I'm kind of an archivist at heart, right? Like, you uncover these relics and then you protect them. And that's really the ultimate goal. And then you share them with the people that appreciate them the most. Mm-hmm. And so for as much as, as long as I've had the robe now, 23, 24 years, it stays in my home and it's not really seen by a lot of people. So in a way that's not really fair. So you take the opportunity to share it with those that are going to appreciate it. But by the same token, you also have to protect and preserve. And as I've mentioned, we're looking at, a 45, 50-year-old garment, and it's already in a compromised position. So, the robe has never really been displayed publicly outside of, WWE's had a couple of appearances at like a fan access at WrestleMania. We did an event, many years ago, about 15 years ago, in the Greensboro area right after Ric Flair's match with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 24. So, and that was really only a one-shot event. So, very limited public consumption for the robe, and definitely nothing in recent years. So, kind of the idea is we're, taking it on the road, and one of the big events, at least for the Mid-Atlantic area, we've got a couple of events coming up. November 11th in the Virginia Beach area at a local card show, sports card trading card event at the Virginia Beach Fieldhouse. The Robe's going to be on display. And then back here on November 18th in Greenville, North Carolina, at another sports card event. And then kind of capping that off at WrestleCade, right, which will be kind of the main event showcase for the Robe. The first time we've brought it out, again, not to be able to wear, but we are going to have photo ops with the Robe, a replica of the NWA belt, available at WrestleCade. All the information is I'm still kind of releasing on our Facebook page, which is Ric Flair's Starrcade 83 Robe on Facebook. But the weekend of WrestleCade is going to kind of be the main event where you can get your picture with the Robe and the NWA belt.
Oh wow, that's awesome. So not only are you getting your picture taken with the belt, I'm sorry, with the Robe, but now you guys have added a replica of the NWA title, so that can really take an old school fan back in time.
Yeah, and I think, I'm still kind of in the preliminary phases of planning, but we're going to have a little bit of a memorabilia display. I'll have a pair of Ric Flair's trunks from about 1977, 78 that he would have worn in a match with Buddy Rogers. Of course, the Battle of the Nature Boys, when Buddy came into the territory towards the end of his career. I've got a pink pair of his trunks that we'll have on display, along with the boots that he wore against Ricky Steamboat at the Chi-Town Rumble in '89. Those will be on display as well with the Robe. And what we're, again, as we'll kind of put the asterisk up there, card subject to change, what I'm tentatively planning on right now is finalizing a price point to keep the photo ops with the Robe affordable, to where if you take a picture with the Robe and the NWA belt, you'll also get a free lapel pin that we've had made of the Robe. So you get this kind of cool little free lapel pin, which is about a retail $15 value in and of itself, just for the pin, for taking a picture with the Robe and the belt at WrestleCade. So I'll have more kind of finalized on that in the coming weeks as we work that out on the Facebook page. And we also have the website, which is flairrobe.com. All that information will be available there. But yeah, you get your picture taken, you got the Robe, the belt, and you get a free lapel pin. I mean, that's pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, man, that's a great deal all day long. Now, speaking of the Ric Flair Robe, I know we've been talking about that for the on the show, but my question for you also, is this robe the only robe that you've ever owned, or have you owned other Ric Flair robes?
Yeah, so I've actually at one time, before the present state that we live in now, at one time I had the largest private collection of Ric Flair robes outside of Ric Flair on planet Earth, which was 3. So I've actually had 3 at one time, which was, of course, the Starrcade robe that we're talking about here. I had the gold robe, which was kind of circa 1993, 92, 94.
That's
WW.
That's the one that WWE owns now, right?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I own that. I own the gold robe, and I'll give you the backstory on that one. And then I also owned a pink robe as well, the one that had all the beautiful peacock feathers and kind of the ornate dark purple magenta silver pattern that he wore when he was in WWE for the first run, and then he wore it also in WCW for a little while in the 90s, and then he actually wore it again once or twice in WWE for a second run around 2007, 2008. But going back to the gold robe, which I think originated around 88, 89, had this really large Velcro belt buckle, for lack of a better description, right in the front and center, and then it had the puffy arm sleeves to it. So I had that robe, and he ended up getting that robe back, and I think he wore it. He probably wore it for at least once or twice on some WWE productions. Probably around 2007, 2008. And then WWE ended up acquiring that robe in sort of an agreement with Ric Flair. After I got rid of it, it went back to Ric Flair, and then from Ric Flair to the ownership of WWE. And so they had that in their archives for a long time. I'm not quite sure if it's still in their ownership or, kind of what the story is there in recent years. Because sometimes, they make deals to acquire other pieces of memorabilia. So sometimes things are exchanged right between collectors to move pieces around in sort of an elaborate chess match, so to speak. So.
Right.
Not quite sure about that now, but the pink robe I also owned, and that was really a favorite of mine. It had this really nice velvet pink sort of almost bathrobe kind of tie to it in the front, and the silk patterns inside. It was a beautiful robe, and I sold that robe privately probably around 2014, and then it changed hands sometime after that to where, I guess WWE produces these, video games. 2K19, I think was what it was, WWE 2K19. And whoever produced that video game actually purchased the robe, and they cut it up to include pieces of the robe with the video game purchase. So you got like a special limited edition Funko Pop. You got a piece of the robe in a nice acrylic pack, and then of course the video game. So it was like a high end package where you got that in there. But they ended up cutting that robe up. So
wow,
yeah, and that was Olivia Walker robe as well. But yeah, I had three at one time. I had a gold one, a pink one, and then of course the Starrcade, which I still have.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, so if you could own any Ric Flair robe besides the Starrcade robe, which I'm sure I know which one it is, but I just want to ask you which robe would it be?
For as great as the Starrcade is, and I love it, and it represents everything that makes me warm and fuzzy inside about about pro wrestling, about Jim Crockett Promotions, the Mid-Atlantic area, Starrcade 83, Ric Flair, all those things, right, are balled into one for the Starrcade robe. My favorite Ric Flair robe of all time has been this, I don't know what we would call it, but it's the purple, it's just the purple robe. I don't think you ever wore it. I don't think you wore it in
the purple one with the really long sleeves.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was just,
yeah.
It was almost like the pink robe that I had. But it was the purple version. It was completely covered in sequins, and it had this beautiful, silver, light purple, dark purple pattern. That beautiful silk inside it. It was just always so elegant to me. And I don't know that it's tied to like one particular match, but you obviously know the robe that I'm talking about. But for some reason, just always spoke to me, and I was just like, man, that is just a phenomenal robe, to me. I think that's probably, truthfully, my favorite one of all time.
Yeah, if I could think back, the first time I ever seen that robe would have been the Great American Bash where he wrestled Terry Funk in his comeback. I think that's probably the first time I saw the robe.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just great. It's like, I don't know if it's just the fact that it's, it's purple. It's just so elegant.
Mm-hmm.
But
now,
I love.
Did you ever get to see that robe in person?
I've never seen that robe in person. I did know the gentleman that had it originally, and then he ended up and sold it. And I do know that a replica has been made by a former WWE costume designer, and he did a phenomenal job with the replica. I think the replica was even on TV maybe within the last couple of years. And at first glance, I kind of thought, oh wow, this is the original robe. So that speaks to the quality of the replica. But I've never had a chance to see that one in person. I know where it's at now. I think I'd like to see it just because I used to have this poster hanging in my room behind my door of Ric Flair that somebody gave me wearing that robe.
So I'm trying to remember. So I saw that robe live at Starrcade '93 when he worked Vader. He wore it out, and all I can remember is when the lights hit it, like how much it sparkled. It was almost it was just. It's like I said, it's one of the things you got to see it in person.
You got to stop,
but it was just amazing.
Yeah,
it's like, man, I want one of those. and I'll tell you, early on in my wrestling career, I had went to this fabric store and they had all this sequin material, and I'm like, man, I need to get a robe made. So the girl I was dating at the time, her aunt or somebody, made clothes, and she told me, she's like, yeah, if you just go get me a bathrobe pattern, I'll make it longer, and I'll make the sleeves bigger, and and just get me a liner and get me whatever color you want. And I remember walking into that fabric store, and they had that same color of Ric Flair's robe, the fuchsia color. They had that color there. They had black and they had gold. And I said, man, and of course, I started wrestling like '93, and I went to Starrcade, and I said, I'm going to have a robe made that color. So she made the robe. And as a matter of fact, what I'll do whenever I post this on Facebook, I'll get my robe and post a picture of it. Of course, it's nowhere near the quality of Olivia Walker's, but it was still pretty cool. And I had that robe, and early on in my wrestling career, I was very shy, and it was almost like once I got that robe, man, I just came out of my shell. And when she first made it for me, it had black. It was purple, and we couldn't find feathers that were purple, so we decided to go with black. So she put feathers around the collar and around the sleeves, but they didn't last very long because she didn't sew those on. She just what do you call it? She safety pinned it all the way around. And years of putting it in my bag and taking it out, they came loose. So I just took the feathers off completely. And I can tell you, I retired the robe. It's kind of a funny story. So when she made the robe for me, I debuted it in Thomasville, North Carolina, my hometown where I was originally grew up. I wore it out that night there for Ken Spence. I worked for Ken Spence. I debuted it there for him. And then 20 years later or whatever it was, Ken called me back, and they were doing this big reunion show in Thomasville. And of course, I hadn't wore that robe in a long time. And I said, I think tonight would be a good time to retire that robe. So I wore that robe out again there in Thomasville for Ken Spence at his reunion show. And and it was kind of funny too, because when I debuted it, I worked the Lumbee Warrior, and when I wore it that night, I wore it against Lumbee Warrior again. So it had, it made that little circle, which I thought was really cool. But that robe has been in my garage now for about 3 or 4 years. It's still down there, so I'm gonna have to get it out tomorrow and take a picture of it and post it on the Facebook page.
Yeah, I think, the thing I heard there was, you mentioned kind of your confidence and kind of coming out of your shell. I think you said something about that, about wearing the robe. And I think that's, at least for me, I think is another significant point in what Ric Flair's presentation sort of brings to the table, right? Because when I first got the Starrcade robe, I wasn't in the wrestling business yet. I went on to referee for many years, and I'm still active in it today. But I think, having that robe, or, maybe in your case, having one made, kind of, gave you the confidence, or definitely in my case, gave me the confidence to, wear something as ridiculous as that is, right?
Right. Yeah, but it's true.
And just wear it out and have the confidence to know that, hey, as ridiculous as this looks, I own this. I am this, kind of article of clothing represents who I am, how I feel, and I project that to the people. And for me, as crazy as it was, I was telling somebody the other day, I said, I remember when I bought the robe, I had, I was probably 17, 18 years old at the time. And I had been buying and selling baseball cards for a long time, from middle school to high school. So I'd been sort of building up my nest egg to have some money. I don't know what it was for or what it was to buy. Eventually it ended up being a Ric Flair robe. But when I did buy it and it came and it was delivered to the house on the front porch, and I came home from school, and I was in high school at the time, my mom said, hey, you got this package from Colorado. What is it? And I was like, oh yeah, it's a Ric Flair robe, and she's like, what is this foolishness? Or her work, because it just seems so just bizarre and different, and it didn't fit into this, idea of whatever, maybe she had for me, or what the expectations were at the time. But I had this interest there, and so when you get it, you get this, kind of level of confidence, and then if you wear it and it's out there and you own it and you accept it as, hey, this is who I am, and this is what I'm going to project to the people, or whatever, it's a tremendous confidence booster. So I understand what you're talking about when you're talking about, like I wore this out there to help me come out of my shell, which I think is part of what the appeal is with Ric Flair, right? Like that comes to that.
Right. Yeah.
Same thing with Elvis, right? You've got almost this working man mentality, but when he walks out on stage, it's like, man, he's got all this, sparkle and shine, and man, that could be me. And you're really only like, 1 degree of separation from, greatness, right? And this article of clothing kind of represents that bridge that can get you over there. So I get what you're saying when you talk about that, because it kind of did the same thing for me.
Yeah, because I remember when I was in middle school. Middle school is when I become a big wrestling fan when I was in elementary school, but I become obsessed with it by middle school. In middle school, I knew, I didn't know how, but I knew at some point in my life I was going to be a wrestler, because I would, and I'm sure every kid in America done this during this time, but I live in this neighborhood, and I get all the neighborhood kids over, and we would like walk up and down the street, and whenever one of the neighbors or somebody was throwing out an old mattress, we would grab it, bring it down to my parents' backyard, and we had this big fence around our yard, and so that mattress would go over there by the fence, and we'd take a tarp and put a tarp over the mattress, and we'd hang up a little bit of ropes, and and then like we would and I don't even know why we did this, but like there was a factory next door that did carpeting, and we'd go over there and get their old carpet, and then cut the carpet out in the shape of wrestling belts and take magic markers and draw on this piece of carpet and fold it up until it got broke in real good, so it folded like a belt. And then we would take like clothespins or something like that to put it around our waist or whatever. But I was obsessed with wrestling, by the time middle school rolled around. And if in middle school, if I knew and my parents would have given me the money, I would have bought a pair of wrestling boots, and I'd have wore those things to school every single day because I was just so obsessed with being a wrestler, and all of my friends knew how much I liked it. So once I got into high school, I started my wrestling training the summer of my junior year in high school, and once I graduated from wrestling camp and started having matches, a lot of my friends, and I didn't even think about it, but I would run into friends from high school and say, oh, by the way, come down this Saturday night and wrestling at the Armory. They'd be like, well, that don't surprise us because we knew how much you love wrestling when we was in school, and we knew that so if you could figure out how to get in it, you would, and there you are. And that's how I was, man. I was so obsessed with it as a kid. And so, like you say, having that piece, would definitely boost your energy. And like now, I've sold more than I probably have now of boots and tights and belts and all the other stuff that goes along with wrestling. But I'm like you. I get it. I enjoy it. Now I want to pass it along, pass it down to somebody else that might enjoy it just as much as I do. And of course I sell it to get bigger and better things. So I, when I look back over the years, I look at myself and sometimes I pinch myself. I'm like, I grew up, not, I knew it. Like I said, I knew I was going to be a wrestler. I just didn't know how. But once I walked into Kmart that day in 1992, and there stood Jimmy Valiant, and I was like, oh my God, that's the Boogie Woogie Man. And my first question to him wasn't, hey, how are you? Hey, how can I get in wrestling? That was my first question to him. And he said, kid, here's my phone number. Give me a call on Monday and I'll tell you. And man, my head went, it swelled so big. I came home from school and I told my parents, I said, I'm not going to college next year. I'm going to Jimmy Valiant's wrestling camp. I'm going to be a pro wrestler. And my dad said, you're going to do what? I said, yeah, I'm going to go I'm not going to go to college now. I'm going to go to Boogie's camp. I'm going to be a wrestler and I'm going to be a millionaire. And I did one of the two. I never become a millionaire, but I did become a wrestler. And when I first started, I had no idea. I just thought I'd just be, Jimmy Valiant would be the most popular wrestler I'd ever knew. I'd be in the ring with him, and that'd be it. But I have got to live out dreams that I never even dreamed or ever thought would happen. And then to be, to get into it so much that that I have the guys that I idolized as a kid say, hey, I'll work that show, but I'm not working anybody but Tony. That's a heck of a compliment. And, a lot of times, we can always be our biggest, I know for me, I'm my biggest critic, but I can have a good match, but in my head, it wasn't good enough, because I'm always wanting to be better. But to have a wrestling legend that has been around and wrestled everybody, and they say, hey, I'll wrestle, but I'm not wrestling anybody but Tony. That's a really good compliment.
Yeah, no doubt. I think, when you kind of give your perspective of, growing up as a wrestling fan, I think that's from my side, that's one of the areas I was kind of different in, is that I didn't necessarily grow up a wrestling fan, right? I didn't watch it as a kid. I watched Ninja Turtles. I watched Masters of the Universe. kind of loosely knew about wrestling in the background, but it was always a background thing. Grandparents watched it. Parents may have had it on in the background, but I didn't grow up as a fan. So I kind of grew into it. And the confidence piece, I think came from when I first got the Robe, right, was kind of the transition piece to say, well, okay, I'm kind of loosely interested in this, to, all right, now I've got this thing, and now, what are you going to do with it? And then you start to meet, kind of like you mentioned with Jimmy Valiant, you start to meet people in the business, and then it kind of got me in the business of professional wrestling, and then you get, a different perspective, right? From where maybe in your case, somebody says, hey, I only want to wrestle Tony if I'm going to be on the show. And that's a good, tip of the cap. So I went from, not even being a fan really to, loosely following wrestling, to being a fan of Ric Flair, to owning this piece of history, to them being in the business, right? Which is kind of this almost windfall of a story to even be involved. So I've just kind of been lucky along the way.
Right. And then to go on and say that you're the only person, that ever owned, well, you own three of Ric Flair's robes. That's also pretty impressive.
Well, I was, like I said, I wasn't a fan growing up, but I started. I played tennis in high school. I was a tennis player, and my sophomore year, I had a torn meniscus in my knee, and so I couldn't play for most of the season. I was out, and during that period, when I would rehab and back and forth to the orthopedic, at that time, you could rent videos from Blockbuster.
Right. Yeah.
And this would have been the height of the Monday Night Wars. So you're talking 97, 98. So there's a lot of content out there that you could get your hands on in terms of rentals. And I just, the Monday Night Wars were hot. So the content was engaging, even if I wasn't a wrestling fan. And my parents had both experienced wrestling, in the 70s, Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat. My mom had been to matches at Norfolk Scope, and she had seen, Flair and Steamboat. So again, it was always in the background. But now I'm injured. I can't really play. I've got nothing to do. I'm rehabbing. She rents me a bunch of videos, and it's all WWF Coliseum home videos. I start to watch it. Then present day, you got the Monday Night Wars going on, so it's still WWF and there's WCW, but the one guy that just stood out above everything else is Ric Flair. And even though I wasn't a fan, and you're still kind of this awkward teenager trying to kind of find your way in the world, you've got this Ric Flair guy that's just, the billboard of confidence, right? And, he's got the hair and he's got the robes, and, he's still talking about the girls and all night long and Space Mountain and all that stuff. And I'm just like, man, this dude's just cool as hell, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm just attracted to that. And then you get the robe, and now it's like, well, hell, you got a piece of, the Emperor's new clothes. You put it on, and you're going to be just like the Emperor. And so that gave me that boost of confidence that I needed, not just through, maybe childhood, adolescence, but then it's like, all right, do you want to get involved in this wrestling thing? And it gives you that confidence. And I think that, even if you don't have a Ric Flair robe, that's the beauty of wrestling. It speaks to anyone, really on any level in any language, right? You don't have to speak English. You don't have to speak Japanese, German, or understand any kind of complex formula to understand who's good or bad, or who's confident or who's not. And there's just certain representations that speak universally. And so I think that's always been the appeal with wrestling. It'll continue to be the appeal with wrestling. And you don't have to have a certain net worth or a certain intelligence level to understand it. And so as it speaks to those kind of just grassroots levels, obviously you've talked about what it's done for you, what it's done for me. just be involved in the business to go from not even being a fan to ending up in the ring one day with Dusty Rhodes or Harley Race or Ric Flair to having Charlotte Flair at your house. I mean, that's just an unbelievable story that I never could have fathomed, as a 17, 18-year-old kid, and then it ends up happening. That's just the beauty of wrestling, so,
mm-hmm.
You spoke to that. So
yeah,
good stuff.
And you're talking about, the way Ric Flair was on TV. Man, I would steal his lines when I was in middle school, and I would say it to like all the girls that I was liking or whatever. And I remember saying the first time I said to a girl, "You can't be first, but you could be next." And she's like, "What?" But a lot of people didn't watch wrestling, so when I say those Ric Flair lines, they'd be like, "Man, this Tony guy's a cocky son of a bitch," And I thought it was funny, and I was just mimicking the things he would say. And then I remember by the time I got to high school, me and another one of my friends we both were big wrestling fans. And so we would sit down, and if he had a girlfriend or I had a girlfriend or whatever, and he'd always say, "Hey, come on." He'd call me on the phone because I live right next door. "Hey, Tony, man, come on over here. I need you to help me write a Ric Flair letter to this chick." And I'm like, "Okay." So I'd come over there, man, and me and him would, because this is before cell phones and computers and all that stuff. And so we'd sit down, and he'd say, "All right, so tell me some Ric Flair one-liners, and I'm gonna write that down in this letter." And of course, we're writing this letter up to this chick, and then vice versa. He'd say, "Hey man, I need to break up with this chick. Come on over. Let's write her a Full Horseman letter." So to get the girl, it was the Ric Flair letter. To break up with her, it was the Full Horseman letter. And then he and I just like we didn't know the words, the kayfabe words in wrestling, but we had our own, and it was always me, him, his brother, and another guy named Wayne. It was always together. And we'd tell everybody that, we are the Full Horsemen of our high school. And if you fight one, you got to fight the other three. And we kind of live by that, And so looking back at the wrestling thing is like like I said, I always knew all along somehow or another I was going to get in there. I just didn't know how. But I knew once I figured it out, I was going to do everything I could to make it happen. And then even when I first got in and started wrestling, they like, "Well, you're 125 pounds. You're definitely not going to be wrestling. You're too small." I'm like, "Bullshit. I can do this, And so for the first 6 months that I was training, I'd go work at this other promotion as a manager. But once I learned to throw punches, I would throw a punch, and these other workers would be like telling the promoter, "Man, you've got to put Tony in there. That little dude has got the prettiest punch in the world." And so he's like, no, he's too small. He's too small. So finally he's like, I said, "Man, I want to wrestle." So he says, "I'll tell you what, Tony, if I ever get any small guys to come in and work, I'll let you work." Well, just so happened, a couple months later, as fate would have it, he calls me on the phone and he goes, "Hey, Tony, make sure you come to the building, a couple hours early this Sunday, because I've got a guy coming in from Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and I'm going to put you against him." And I'm thinking, "Oh man, I'm going to be working with Heavenly Bodies, Rock'n'Roll Express." I didn't know. I was so young and green. But it turns out there was a guy that used to work up there for Smoky Mountain. He was a referee. His real name was Daryl Morris. And he and what was the guy that went to WCW? He was a referee too, up in WCW. What's that?
Brian Hildebrand, Curtis.
Mark Curtis. So he and Mark Curtis would do popcorn matches for Smoky Mountain house shows. So Daryl, who I'm talking about, he would wear a hood and call himself Flash, and he was just like he was just the heel. He was just a heel. And but Mark Curtis would wear this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle costume.
Yep.
And
Yep.
they would have these great matches. And so Jeff, at the time, the promoter Jeff, he's like, Tom, I'm gonna put you with Daryl, and just listen to Daryl, man, and he'll help you out. And so I get in the ring with Daryl, or I'm in the back with Daryl, we're talking everything over, and he's like, all right, can you do this? No. Can you do a sunset flip? No. What can you do? I can throw a punch, you know, and I kind of like from that moment on, Daryl's like, you know, Tony, I'm going to take you under my wing and I'm going to teach you. And so I was getting double wrestling training. I'd go to Boogie's camp on Sunday and train there. Then the next Saturday I'd go back to Morganton. I'd train with Daryl. And so I was, you know, getting double training at the same time. And then finally, when I really learned to work, Daryl's like, man, Tony, you and I are going to have a great match. And then I think he got mad at the promoter because he was wanting to get paid more money. And the promoter's like, well, I can't really do that. And so he just went back to Smoky Mountain. And of course, he never came back around. And I was so pissed because because once he left, there was no more small guys for me to work, which meant I wasn't working anymore for a while. So, but it's so funny how you know how things happen in your life that you don't like in your mind you say it's going to happen, you just don't know how, and then once it happens you're like, oh yeah, okay, I knew this all along. I just didn't know how to get there, but I'm here now.
That's right.
And it's just
Absolutely.
it's just amazing thing. So, well, I guess we're going to start wrapping up this podcast, and it's been really cool learning all this stuff about the robes and how we all kind of intertwine with each other. But tell the people at home one more time of how they can get all the information on how to see this robe in person.
Yeah, so two primary outlets. There's www.flairrobe.com. That's our main website, and pretty soon we'll be launching a merchandise outlet there where you can purchase some of the items that we offer, from the lapel pins I mentioned earlier to actual relic plaques that can be displayed, or trading cards as well. And then also we're active right now on Facebook with the Ric Flair Starrcade 83 Robe. You can look that up. And from there, you know, we talk about a lot of our appearances we've got coming up throughout the Mid-Atlantic area with Virginia Beach, Eastern North Carolina, and then, of course, kind of capping that off with WrestleCade right after Thanksgiving this year in November.
Wow. So a lot of chances to come out and see this robe and get your hands on relics and the lapel pins and all the great stuff that connects you to this robe. And who knows, you know, after Starrcade that you know, it could be the last chance you get to be able to get your picture taken with this gorgeous work of art. So I highly recommend, if you come to WrestleCade, definitely do the photo op with the belt. And who knows, if I'm there, I'll even do a photo op with you for free if you buy the ticket to but seriously though, definitely get your picture taken this road, because it's definitely going to be a great memory for anybody that does it.
Yeah, it's a piece of history. You know, as odd as it sounds, I've had it living in my house, and with the exception of maybe once or twice, I don't think I've ever taken a picture with it.
Wow.
So I should probably do that myself at WrestleCade.
Yeah.
So if I'm
should be the first one,
you should be there too.
For sure. It's definitely going to be something really cool to see. And I'm sure the line for that is going to be just as long as the line to see any of the stars there at WrestleCade.
Be longer. So. It'll be longer than the line at Space Mountain.
That's right. People, you don't have to go to Disney World to get your picture taken with the robe. You can come to
Absolutely.
All right, Wes. Well, thank you for your time, man. I really enjoyed our conversation. Like I said, fans, make sure that you go to his sites and check out all this information on the robe. I will also put the the links into the description of the podcast, so there's no excuse that you didn't hear or you didn't write it down. It'll be there for you to click on if you read the description of our podcast. But Wes, thank you again, man, for coming on the show. I think this is the second time you've been on my podcast, and I always enjoy talking to you, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing you at WrestleCade.
Absolutely, Tony. I appreciate you, man. Look forward to seeing everybody.
All right, guys, for Wes, I'm Tony. We'll see you next week here on the Binge Buster Show.
Thank you for listening to the Binge Buster Show. Make sure you like us on Facebook and download us on your favorite podcast platform.